This episode of the podcast has been brought to you by Sweet Cheetah Publicity. Sweet Cheetah is an inclusive, socially conscious PR collective that puts their money where their mouth is. They have a current roster of bands that reads like a greatest hits anthology. Brainiac, Catholic School, Jawbox, The New Amsterdams, Oceans in the Sky. I mean, the list goes on and on. They also do PR for record labels such as A La Carte, Arctic Rodeo, Steadfast, Rad Girlfriend, and so many more. How do they pay it forward? How do they put their money where their mouth is? By generating thousands of dollars in annual charitable donations to the likes of Women in Vinyl, Coalition of Communities of Color, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and many, many more. The man has the receipts. I've seen them. It is real. The artists, labels, and podcasts Sweet Cheetah works with are curated with an eye on working primarily with friends. You could find Sweet Cheetah on all of the social media platforms, be it Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just look for Sweet Cheetah PR, and they will be there. He's been Tim, I've been Peter, and Sweet Cheetah has been beautiful.
To win this, I would. If I could to win this, I would.
Hello, you magnificent bastards, and welcome to another edition of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and I am still here. Tonight on the episode, we have Davey Furchow from the band Dry Wedding, the Portland post-cowpunk group, as they would call themselves, have finally released their newest album, Sway, on vinyl. 2 different colors and black. Go to Bandcamp right now. That would be drywedding.bandcamp.com and buy yourself a nice slab of vinyl that's packed from stem to stern with some of the dustiest, dankest, and most dismal cowpunk, post-goth, whatever you'd like to call it. It's just seething with complete and utter despair. It's beautiful. You need this record. You need their record previous to it, The Long You Rode, which is also available on Bandcamp to purchase on vinyl. If you're a fan of bands like 16 Horsepower or Woven Hand, if you're a fan of the Screaming Trees, or Mark Lanigan. What about the unsung yet fully important Paw? Or Mark Hennessy? Or Mark Hennessy's new band, Godzillionaire? If any of this music appeals to you with that gothic western sensibility, I think you're really going to love Dry Wedding. I'm not sure if any of you have been keeping up with me and my extra podcast affair that has currently been taking place with offshelf.net. I am a contributing columnist doing a column called Shadow Plays, where I write about the newest and most important post-punk bands currently within the underground. I don't really just spit information at you with this particular column. It is more to do with comparing and contrasting its importance and presence in culture. If you're at all interested in reading my pieces, just go over to offshelf.net and take a peek at Shadow Plays. If you're at all interested in becoming a full-fledged member and donating at the monthly or yearly, subscribing at the monthly or yearly level, please do so. But if you don't want to, if you just want to donate some cash, just go to my Instagram, go over to my Venmo account, and give me a tip if you're into it. But what I really want is for you to like, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on whatever streaming platform you are getting this at. Okay? Wherever you're streaming us, go over there. Give me a review. Give me a like. Please subscribe. It'd mean the world to me. And if you really want to go that extra mile, like I always ask, just share my posts on Instagram or Facebook. It goes a long way. Word of mouth makes or breaks any business, folks. So I'm not going to bore you with too many more of my ramblings. It is my pleasure to give to you Davey Furchow, Dry Wedding, on the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Well, that's the Gorilla Biscuits pizza box
Oh,
set.
yeah.
Did you see that one yet?
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah. Did you order this by any chance?
Yeah,
Did you get a hold of it?
I did.
Okay. Thank God, because, like, I know people who still haven't gotten the Discord box sets.
Yeah, and I mean, they kept, saying we'll make as many as people, order, but for some reason, a lot of people didn't know that. And then once it was done being pressed and shipped, I know a lot of people who were scrambling to try and find one, and then people were flipping them, and it's just a vinyl collecting mess.
Yes, but I can't stand the whole, like, flipper mentality. Just because I'm a nerd collector, as you can see by the over 7,000 LPs I have behind me currently. It's a sickness. I've been collecting them since 1988.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there, I don't follow a script. It's not in me to do so. I think that might be what people like about the show. I don't know. I don't even know if people do like the show. But I have to say there's something like in the air in Portland. I know Portland used to be a very dark place. I used to visit it quite frequently, and it wasn't what Portlandia was selling to people. There was a lot of dark shit happening in Portland. I know it's been gentrified, but do you think that like lends itself, like that darkness itself, that obsidian underbelly of Portland, do you think that lends itself to the musical climate?
Yeah, I think the connection I've always made is, of course, the weather, and then just the abundance of nature, the trees, the forests, the mountains, and even, other types of natural landscapes here in Oregon. They're just not, the Oregon desert isn't like other deserts. The Oregon coast isn't like other beaches. Yeah. It's kind of its own beast. And I think there's a natural element that lends itself to that. And I think that there's also, there's just kind of this gloomy, atmosphere, throughout a, good portion of the year. So people kind of hunker down during the colder, rainier months, and they work on art or music or, whatever they happen to be into.
There is something about the Pacific Northwest, though, that it has always lent itself to maybe not dark music per se, but certainly things that went to extremes. Like you have in Seattle, the Sonics way back, moving into, or even prequel to that, Jimi Hendrix, then the Sonics, then the whole Pacific Northwest hardcore scene, which was vibrant and thrilling beyond belief. Be it the U-Men, be it the Melvins, and then we get to like kind of what this new renaissance of what the Pacific Northwest is really about to me, with you guys, Soft Kill, Grave Babies. Like there's just this enclave of really incredible music that's happening there, and it's almost, I wouldn't call it unsung, because there is a serious underground veracity for the consumption of this specific movement, because it's not a genre. Everyone sounds different, but it's more a movement. So like, kind of where did you guys as a musical entity kind of like take root? Where did it all start for you?
Well, actually, and I don't go around and sharing this with tons of locals, but I grew up in Southern California. And then I moved to Portland in 2017. So I've been here for 5.5 years now. And I mean, even a couple weeks before I had even left California, I had Craigslist postings trying to find bandmates and put a band together up here. And then that took quite a bit of work and time and energy to get all of the right pieces for that. I played with a group of guys for the first 9 or 10 months I was here, and it just got to the point where I didn't feel comfortable playing it out live or recording. And to me, that just was a definite sign that something wasn't clicking.
Yeah.
And so I basically, cleaned house and started from scratch and went back to Craigslist for more punishment. And, and then slowly, then I started kind of piecing everything together, and finally had a solid lineup, that met, I won't say my expectations, but I guess, there were expectations. There are certain things I wanted to do, and I wanted to find the right people to do them with. So that all kind of came together in 2018. And then we started playing out January of 2019.
So what were you doing prequel to that in California musically?
Well, the band I was in right before I moved was a band called Swampland. Kind of basically Dry Wedding is what I wanted Swampland to be. There was like this, we took elements of, Americana and country and blues and melded that with post-punk, but I was writing songs with a guy who was very much of the Cure and Smiths school. And so the songs had, I guess more of a pop element. And I kind of wanted to push things in a slightly stranger direction. But, it was a great experience. And, we did a full length and a couple EPs. And then before that, I played pretty much exclusively in punk bands. I sang in punk bands. So that was all my first exposure to the band thing.
I think most of us who are in I hasten to call it the alternative realm. It's punk and punk's children. We started out playing in punk or hardcore bands. Myself, my majority of my past lies in hardcore. And then you kind of pick up steam and move in different directions, and things get pretty like staccato at that point. But in all reality, like this music that everyone is kind of like gleaning their cues from, be it you, be it anyone else I mentioned earlier, they were all punks who grew up on The Cure and Depeche Mode and Sisters of Mercy and all that stuff that was actually considered popular music when we were younger people. I'm sure you're younger than me. I'm fucking old as shit. But like let's not forget 120 Minutes was still on MTV when you were probably young. You know what I mean? Like, so this stuff, like, it had a home and it was considered popular music. It's very interesting that it came to ground and found different routes to Spain, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like people absorbed it and shot it through their own prisms. And now I think it's become better than it ever was. And that's not to take anything away from The Cure. I named my daughter after a Cure song, or Depeche Mode, or even Duran Duran, who I loved when I was a kid. But I think it's better now because it has more touchstones. You know what I mean? Like there's more behind it. You know, because you're taking from like bands like Quicksand and My Bloody Valentine to, you know, like Adam and the Ants. Like it's all coming into play. But what I think you're doing very well is you're making actual Gothic music, meaning there are very Gothic elements to old country, to old blues music, you know, bluegrass. Like there's very dark subject matter to be mined from these older, more antiquated music styles. Take, for example, Robert Johnson, very dark. We have so many examples of you know, mythos that comes from the dark side that's in our musical pasts that is very Gothic, without marrying like the Cleopatra Records idea of like, you know, a goth per se. It's actual American Gothic. Like,
Yeah.
you know, the couple with the pitchfork and the very stern looking, you know, that's kind of what I get from what you're doing. Could you kind of expound upon that, like where your head was at when you were forming this idea?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, because I would never, and I'm not knocking the goth moniker or anyone who identifies as goth,
Right.
but I would never identify that way or identify the band that way. But a phrase that I do use often is Southern Gothic. You know, kind of Cormac McCarthy, kind of Southern Gothic thing. So it's not, it's like you said, it's not like a Cleopatra Records goth approach or aesthetic. It's more of like a William Faulkner, you know, Flannery O'Connor kind of darkness that I'm interested in mining. And, you know, I think it was kind of like what you were saying before, you know, where a lot of people have these punk roots, but they're kind of dabbling in these other things. As a fellow record nerd, I'm sure you would probably agree with this. I got to a point with punk in my teenage years, you know, as I was getting closer to my 20s, where I felt like I knew a ton. And of course, you know, I'm never going to know everything, but I wanted to take that passion and enthusiasm and apply it to different genres of music.
Yeah.
And so then that kind of just exploded my whole world, and I would go down these different rabbit holes. And I mean, now I'm in my mid 30s and I'm still doing that constantly. I'm learning about new music all the time, probably at an unhealthy rate. I probably don't retain all the things that I should retain or actually enjoy things. It's like, you know, it's like eating without chewing first, just swallowing everything. But yeah, I don't know. I got to a point where I was interested in all these different types of music, and I could see that I was starting to gravitate towards the bands that I considered to be the type of band that was incorporating different elements and making something that felt unique, you know, which is a tall order when you have decades and decades of rock and roll and you know, whatever else kind of, you know, that you're trying to contribute to. And so I just got really into the idea of, if I'm in a band, I want to at least attempt to combine things in an interesting way. I don't, again, and I'm not knocking anybody, I don't want to be a carbon copy of this band or that band. I really want to try and contribute to the discourse in a way that helps move things forward, even if it's a very, you know, small baby step forward. And I just, like you were saying, I started connecting those dots where it's like, oh, I'm coming out of punk, but I'm into this weirder, darker music. But what about all this other stuff that is actually, I would argue much darker and much more intense than some of this stuff that's labeled as goth? A lot of that stuff to me is just, pop music fed through some chorus pedals. It's not, and I like some of that stuff too. I'm not, again, not knocking that, but that's not what I was interested in making. And I feel like I've always done music that way, where like I'm equally as inspired by the things that I don't like and don't want to do as I am by the bands and music that I love. So if I start seeing something pop up like, oh, all the post-punk bands are using a drum machine, I want this guy who plays like he's in Neurosis or the Melvins. Like that's what and that's what happened. So
see, and you bring up Neurosis. I mean, these are bands that in my mind have a gothic element. Acid Bath is a perfect example. They considered themselves to be a Southern Gothic band. When you listen to Acid Bath, there are elements of death metal and black metal. There are elements of alternative rock almost, and Delta blues. To me, the goth moniker, you throw that away. The actual idea of something that's gothic. I think of anything from Bram Stoker to Cormac McCarthy, something that conveys an existential darkness, something that you're actually like laying bare something about yourself that you're terrified of. And I think that's important in music. When people aren't challenging the things that freak them the fuck out, they're not actually facing humanity or existence or reality. So in essence, I think what you do, what Neurosis does, what Acid Bath did, the Melvins do, it's all facing your own demons down. And that's important, and it's brutally honest, and it's fun to listen to, because as much as I still love hardcore and punk, and I love quote unquote goth music, there you can smell the dishonesty in a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
Like you can pick up where they're just putting on airs, so to speak. This feels honest. You know what I mean?
Well, I hope so.
and in turn, what Casey does is very honest and very real, and it comes across. To make that come across very fluently on a piece of wax is phenomenal to me. So I have to ask you, with that existence and existential dread looming large in the air, do you have any idea what I'm going to ask you?
I have an idea, yes.
Yeah. What is it what is your existential terror? What's that dread? What's that thing looming around your head at all times?
This being January 6th, I could probably spout off a bunch of political stuff, but I've actually been thinking about this a lot, because I am familiar with your show and I knew you'd probably ask me this. But the thing that I kept coming back to when I was thinking about how I would answer this is that I feel like the thing that's always looming for me is just the aspect of time and how precious time is, and how I question if I'm using my time effectively. Am I creating something that I can leave behind and maybe the world would be just a little bit better for it? Am I giving enough to the people I love and contributing positively to the world in that way? And I just, there are a million things I want to do. I always feel like there's not enough time. Everything for me always feels urgent. I have to do something now, or it's never going to happen, or somebody else is going to do it instead of me. And so there's just always this battle with time, and like, oh, am I trying hard enough? Am I devoting myself to this enough? And, because I think one of the things that I struggle with the most is just a sense of balance, because I'm either all about something or I don't care about it at all. And there's not a lot of things for me in that gray area. And so that could be difficult to manage as I'm considering all these things. Am I living life in a way where I'll look back at my life and I'll say, yeah, I did all right. I don't
Yeah.
have any regrets. So, I mean, yeah, I could probably talk about this stuff for hours.
Oh, as can I. And like, there's a reason why, I kind of base the entire conceit of the show on just that, because we're all terrified of something. It's almost a unifying theme. And that's what kind of like divides us from the divine, because if we really did truly and heartily believe in some sort of deity, higher power that we're going to ascend to after this, we wouldn't really be afraid of anything now, would we?
No, I don't
It's,
believe the people that say they're not afraid either. I'm like,
nor do I. I mean, Jean-Paul Sartre was terrified of death, and he is the father of existentialism. Like, there's no escaping it. Like, we're alive, we're here, and we're so terrified to let it go. Cards on the table, I'm 46 years old. I have a 3-year-old son in the bedroom next. Like, time fucking terrifies me, because when he's graduating high school, I'm going to be retired. If I get to retire, which I probably fucking won't, let's face facts, but I should be retiring at that point.
yeah.
And men in my family don't last that long. And like, that just, it plays in my head. Like, you have to be there for this kid to at least like get into college. Like, it's terrifying. It's fucked up when you get into that headspace, especially when kids are involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically my rant was just a long way of saying I'm scared of death.
Yeah, and we all are.
And I have my own personal reasons for that. I mean, I don't think anyone necessarily needs a reason. It's a terrifying idea to consider. I probably think about it more than the average person, I would wager. And it all kind of goes back to when I was 13 years old. I lost my father, and there are a lot of parallels between him and I. I was born on his birthday. I was named after him. So it was very interesting to essentially see my name on a tombstone at age 13. Yeah. Different middle names, but
same as my dad and I, different middle name, same last name. Not the same birthday, but funnily enough, he has the same birthday as my wife and my wife's father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a smart decision on my part. Well, I married well, but fuck. At least I don't forget birthdays in this house.
Yeah, there you go.
There, like, accepting something like that so terribly young. I mean, at least I was pushing 40 when I lost my dad. I can't imagine being like very young like that. My wife was 6 months old. She barely remembers her mother. But man, 13, that's a ripe age, because you're already fucked up anyway as a teenager, as a new teenager.
Yeah.
Your hormones are revolting against you. And
yeah, it was like a couple weeks after my 13th birthday, so I was very freshly 13.
So yeah, geez, I wonder why I write dark music. And furthermore, I kind of have to wonder, you're that age, this shit happens to you. Is that like right around the time when punk starts to loom large on your horizon?
Well, it actually happened not too long after that. And actually, one of the sparks for that whole thing was going through my dad's belongings after he passed away. And he had some cassette tapes. And I was going through his cassette tapes, and most of them are just bad, like 90s music, 311, and just like bad alternative rock stuff from that era.
Yeah.
But in these tapes, there was one tape that caught my eye, and it was Black Flag's "Damaged."
Wow.
And it's like the original. I still have it. It's the original Unicorn Records cassette tape.
Wow.
And I was like just so intrigued by the cover art, of course, and I was like, Black Flag, that sounds familiar. I'm gonna take this. And that just completely, I mean, being like, 13, 14 and hearing that, it just completely changed the way I thought about music forever. It's still my favorite punk record of all time. And it just, I was like, I never heard anyone play guitar like that. Just like everything about it. So my whole world kind of flipped then. And then I started seeking out, other punk stuff, and things kind of went from there. And a few years later, I was just like completely obsessed.
Just leave their mark on me. Seldom notice until I've come and gone. Bandages torn from lacerations raw. Rest for a minute, and then this threadbare grill, a fistful of attrition. As I pick up the
Yeah, well, I mean, if you start at Black Flag, that's kind of you're already in the thick of it at that point. There's something to be said about that band specifically too, because you have a bunch of the most extreme personalities on planet Earth, and you have a guitar player who's a massive deadhead, but wants to create music that like completely melts human faces. And at that time, you've got Henry Rollins in the band, which he becomes a contentious figure among Black Flag elitists. I'm not one of those that thinks poorly of him. I kind of think Damaged is their best album next to My War. But that's just, their very existence was brutal.
Mm-hmm.
No wonder the music sounded the way it did. Where does your kind of journey go from there then? Like you find punk and hardcore. Where do you find the darker, more post-punk stuff? Where does that come into play for you?
Well, so right after the Black Flag thing happened, I kind of, I this might, clue you into how my brain works, but I was like, oh, I want to go back to the beginning of punk.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to see like where that started, what it sounded like at first. And to me at the time, I was into like some classic rock stuff. And to me, like learning about like the Ramones and the Clash and the Sex Pistols and all this late 70s punk stuff was like the bridge from like what I used to like, to what I liked now. And then, got obsessed with 80s hardcore. That was kind of my bread and butter for a long time. But like I felt always a little more drawn to the bands, I think, that were, darker or, whatever adjective you'd like to use. I also like kind of instantly took to the bands that pushed boundaries, bands like Flipper, stuff like that. I was also into that sort of stuff. And then like, pulling in things, like Wire, and I got just completely obsessed with the Wipers. And, I mean, like as far as like gloomy punk goes, it doesn't get better than that. And so it's just like, as I continued on, I just started kind of plucking these things, and there was like, the classic, post-punk bands like Bauhaus and Joy Division, all that stuff. It was punk adjacent enough to where it was like an easy sell for me. I was like, yep, I like that. But then, like I said, when I started branching out more, and I mean, I don't I don't think this is gonna surprise anyone that's listened to our music, but when I was in high school, my stepbrother gave me a burned CD of the Birthday Party's Prayers on Fire.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, my brain, I don't think I could fully connect with it yet. I don't think my musical palette was sophisticated enough at that point. But then as I graduated high school and got into college, I was like, yeah, I kind of want to revisit that. And listening to it at that point, it just completely clicked with me. And then again, I did the same thing I did with punk, where I'm like, I'm going to go back to Nick Cave's, origins. I'm going to get into the Boys Next Door and then all the Birthday Party stuff and then go through all the Bad Seed stuff.
Yeah.
And, as I was getting into that, I was learning about all these other, old Australian post-punk bands and all these different post-punk bands from,
when NXS was still awesome, and they were awesome. People don't understand how good NXS was before they became massive. They were very adjacent to a lot of that stuff. That's an aside. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I have a very, very big hard on for that early NXS shit. It was potent, to say the least. Yeah. I don't know if you ever did a deep dive on that stuff, but it's phenomenal.
You know what? I haven't. When I think of Australian bands that I was getting into around that time, it was bands like The Scientists and Beasts of Bourbon and Crime in the City Solution, bands like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just, like I was saying before, I get, interested in an idea, something creates that spark, and all of a sudden I'm learning about, post-punk from all over the world. And at that point, it felt like a very natural progression for me and what I was doing creatively. Until I got into Nick Cave, I didn't even know that singing in like a baritone register was something that worked for me.
Yeah.
And before I was just playing in, hardcore punk bands where I was shouting, and my voice kind of naturally went to a higher register because I was yelling. And then once I started getting into, people like I completely worship Scott Walker. He's my favorite singer of all time. And
so fucking good. My God.
Like I just started gravitating towards voices like his, and of course, Nick Cave and Mark Lanegan, and people with like these really cool,
Mark Lanegan. Oh, poor Mark Lanegan.
Poor Mark Lanegan. And then so I was like, oh my God, like not only can I do that, but it feels very comfortable for me. And so that also kind of broke open some new things. And
Mark Lanegan's a good through line for you too, because he was on SST Records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
But when you think about the Birthday Party, that as much as I love all Nick Cave, there's something about him matched up with who I feel is easily the greatest guitarist of that era. Like you're talking about a guy who was so fluent, but he decided to instead treat his guitar like a buzzsaw. There's something.
I think he's my favorite guitar player of any genre, of any musical movement. And I think that, like I said, I don't think that would be surprising to anybody either. I'm a big Roland S. Howard guy for sure.
His solo work is so underappreciated. I was so happy to see it get reissued recently. The first couple records, anyway. Roland S. Howard has he had his finger on the pulse of something that no one truly understood. I feel. Yeah. He was like the Aleister Crowley of post punk almost, because there was something Stygian and it's almost as if he was in touch with something else, and no one could really understand it. He did albums that completely missed everyone, and I just don't get it how people weren't picking up on this and consuming it at like a psychotic rate. Blows my mind. It blows my mind. But that's another person I could just go on about. Roland S. Howard. So let's get to your first record then? You finally get a band together that you can work with. The writing process for that must have been pretty intense, just predicated upon the output. You know, that album is kind of an emotional roller coaster. What was the lyrical writing? How did that come to pass?
Oh, I mean, that's interesting that you that you describe it as an emotional roller coaster. So
It fucking is.
So when I moved to Portland, I moved with a woman I was dating at the time, and things were a little shaky even before we moved. And I think now looking back, that, you know, in all honesty, I just really wanted to make the move and was probably afraid to do it on my own, and so I was just really hoping that things would work out. And they didn't, and things, you know, I'm writing this record like in our, you know, basement with, you know, my bandmates, and, you know, writing these lyrics as I'm navigating this very, intense relationship. I mean, it was very dramatic, and a lot of things happened that I never thought I would experience or tolerate within a loving relationship.
I've been in this relationship ago.
And so actually, we had a bass player who played with us, you know, for the first little bit. I think he played like the first 6 months of live shows, and then he was like, yeah, this, you know, I want to go do other stuff. This isn't really working for me. And we said, okay. So I went back to Craigslist in the, you know, summer 2019. We got a new bass player who is, you know, still our bassist to this day. And basically we're like, cool, this guy, the old guy's going to play one last show with us. We would like you to play the show with us that we have booked 2 months away from now. And then we also want you to learn all of these songs and record with us, you know, a month or two after that. And so all the songs except for one were already written. The very last song, This Contagious Room, we wrote as like this new lineup. And I mean, that's the one that I think is most telling about what was going on at the time, because I'm writing that, and at that point her and I are on a break but living together. And yeah, it was just
I think that's apparent. I think that comes through quite simply upon first listen.
Yeah.
Now, you're going through all of this, and you're dealing with shadows of the past, and there's a not only the specter of a father lost looming large on your horizon, but you have this inconstant woman, to say the least, in your midst, and you're cohabitating. What takes precedence? I would assume the immediate, right?
Yeah. What do you mean by that exactly?
What takes precedence as far as the voice of the output? Just the immediate situation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, when I approach songwriting, of course, if there are things that are currently impacting me, they might find their way into what I'm doing. But I also I won't call them rules, but I'm very meticulous as far as when I look at oh, these songs are all going on the same album, and I want to make sure that I'm not like hammering on a subject too much, that I'm not reusing certain words too much. I'm I comb through these things and try and make sure that I'm remaining diverse and I'm not getting too stuck in my own ways.
Yeah.
And so I think if you see because not every song on that record is about what I was going through at that time. Clearly there are a few, but there's also like a song about my dad on there, and there's one about him on the second album as well. And just whatever other topics or like you were saying before, demons that I'm confronting about myself and who I am.
Well, you're not spelling it out, is what I'm saying. It leaves a lot of room for inference and for internalization on the part of the listener. What I mean by that is you're leaving it oblique enough that it's the listener, the beholder, can make it applicable to their own personal life. It's not like my dad died, I'm fucked up, the end. You're not spelling things out. It has that poetic license where it can become very personal to someone just via inference. You know what I'm saying? And that's important. That's an important kind of point of view to take as a writer, not to inject too much of yourself or of what is and spell that out. You kind of let it be its own little universe unto itself, thereby making it less just about the subject and more about the emotion. And that's a great thing. That's very refreshing. I always enjoy lyrical content that takes that point of view because A, I'm selfish, as we all are, and B, I'd gone to school to become a literature professor. I never finished. I have my BA. That got me exactly nowhere, but my appreciation for the written word renders it such that when I see lyricism of that degree taking that point of view, it's inspiring to me. I appreciate that. I think with The newest record, you do so even more, but it's also less of a roller coaster, but darker. I think this is the darker of the two, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So I can't believe my face froze in that way. I'm looking at it right now. I look ridiculous. It's beautiful, but well, as compared to the first record, where was your head at with the second?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming out of that situation, there were still some things I was trying to work through. Uh, and so, some of the songs were definitely based on me still trying to kind of shake that all off. Now I'm just trying to think of all the songs on that album in my head. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because that, the way I approach lyric writing is I think you're pretty spot on. For example, I was like, I'm not going to write a COVID song.
Mm.
I refuse to do that. I don't like to write things that like really date a song and just kind of place it in a very specific time and place. I try to write things in a way where it could apply to any year or era, really. So I'm not going to be singing about modern day technology or anything like that, probably.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, but what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing during, being in quarantine and things like that, I wanted to express that. And so usually, like, if I'm experiencing something like that, I will focus on the feelings that thing evokes. I'll try to, instead of being like, I feel this way, which is super abstract, I try to use very concrete, imagery to illustrate whatever that feeling or thought is, and then bring it back in at one point where there is, like, maybe it's a chorus or a bridge or something where it's, I view it kind of as the point of the song, where if you're like, what are all these crazy, weird, dark images, you can, there's the point in the song where you're like, oh, like, that's something that I can identify with. And so, like, yeah, why am I blanking on the name of my own song? Like, Frayed Rope was like my COVID song, but it's not about COVID at all. Grave Mistakes is about my father. That one, I kind of wanted to twist what you were actually praising me for, and I tried to be a little more specific about my particular situation. I was trying to experiment with this kind of Mountain Goats-esque, like, level of detail, because I sometimes also really enjoy songs that do that. And yeah, I mean, I think, again, like, Mutiny is like, all of these images of things being hogtied and confined, but they're all like feelings inside of me that are experiencing this, and then they are unleashed. Yeah, I mean, I kind of, like I said, I look at something, or Depraved Estate is kind of about my habit of collecting things. But instead of being like, I spend too much money on records, it's about the persona that I take on is like, has this filth kind of like spreading out all over their property and all of these wild decorations in their yard. And I talk about being carried away, like, metaphorically and actually literally being carried away. So I like to, like, play around with, all that type of stuff. And you were saying you studied literature. I have a creative writing degree. So.
Oh, yes. It's the unusable degree. I'm a pipe fitter by trade, so I don't get to use, well, I'll put it to you in a different way. I'll skew it differently. I realized that I could either be a tech writer for the rest of my life, which was my initial vocation directly thereafter college, or become a teacher, which I would have despised wholeheartedly because A, they just get treated like trash, and B, don't make as much money as they deserve. Or I could go into the vocation that my father had passed on to me, which was pipe fitter plumber. And that made the most money, and that made the most sense, and that took the least emotional toll on my psyche. So I said, you know what? I already know how to do this. I could go into this and be the best apprentice on planet Earth because I'd already been abused into being fantastic at it by my father. So I may as well just do it. And that's what I did. But it didn't dissuade me or disabuse me of my passion for the written word. And I recognize your fluence and literacy within the context of storytelling based upon the lyrical content, because I do kind of get lost in it. And a lot of people, I think they latch on to the phonetics and how, a vocal melody is presented, but they don't really adhere to lyricism the way punks do. I think it's a very punk rock thing to dissect lyrics and to get so deep into, the meaning behind it and how it pertains to you. And maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe there are, jam band fans who dig into Fish lyrics, but I sincerely doubt it. I think that's a very punk aesthetic. It's a very a precept of what it is to be a punk rocker, to codify lyrics as a personal mission statement. Do you agree? It becomes almost part and parcel to a religious experience within music for me. Neurosis is a great example, although they've had their travails, certainly with one member, and it's the rest of them, it's not their fault. They're still brilliant and incredible and make the most sublime music ever written. But their lyrics can be almost haiku at times, much like Discharge's lyrics can be like haiku, just repeated phrases, but there's something epic and grandiose and spiritual about, Steve Von Till's lyricism that just catches me. And like the song The Doorway off of right after Through Silver and Blood, your favorite album, Pete. God damn it. Anyway, the song The Doorway by Neurosis, people look it up. The lyrics are simple, but they paint such a almost Bob Dylan-esque picture of apocalyptic landscapes and human tribalism that you can almost feel yourself, putting like home fashioned face paint on and marching into battle. And it feels very tactile. I think especially on your second album, it's that tactile. It's that relatable and that almost spiritual that I kind of want. That's why I'd wondered what more so went into the second record. The first record is fantastic. This one, number one, Sway is my favorite song by the Rolling Stones. So I kind of want to believe that you were like, yeah, I love that song too. I'll name the album that. I'm sure that's not what it is. That is my favorite Stones song. And it's a demonic song at best. But with that inference in mind, there is something demonic about this album.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I named it Sway just because I started seeing this pattern with some of my lyrics, for the record, where I was using essentially different synonyms for something swaying. I used the word undulating in one song, and I just started to see this common thread. I mean, I think even to songs I've written, prior to that album. And I was like, yeah, Sway just seems like kind of like this through line. I feel like I'm always writing about things that are swaying or jittering or, whatever the case may be. I was like, yeah, that'll work.
That's funny then, because there's
the lyrical content of the song "Sway" by the Rolling Stones, it's about the demon of addiction. It's just that demon while it's got you in its sway. And you picture the cover of your record, and it's like this desiccated goat creature almost, right? And it's still adjacent to the Stones. So there's like this weird through line to that came to mind. And they do have a Gothic bent on Sticky Fingers that continued into Exile on Main Street, but you may not be as much of a Stones freak as I am. But I don't know why I equate the two as being in the same league, but I kind of do, because that is a Southern Gothic record as well by a bunch of British people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about, how, when we were approaching the second album, it was, I think, and when we're doing this right now as we're writing the third, it's, looking back at the last one and going, okay, what did we like? What did we not like? What can we further expand upon and explore? Do we want to take this element and push it this way? Do we want to try this thing we never did on the last record at all? And I think just because at that point we were this unified unit, we had been playing out, we had recorded an album together, that process just got that much smoother, and we started just to be able to kind of pick up on things super quickly, develop that inner band language. And, so there were like things that were very intentional. It's like, okay, we want, we'll call the faster ones a burner. We're like, all right, we want to write a burner. So then we wrote Out of Reach, which was one of the songs that was about my former partner. And then we're like, oh, when we want to do like a slower song, and we want to, and that's, like I said, that's how we're kind of approaching as we're writing this third one. I think we wanted to cover more ground, genre wise and inspiration wise, but we also wanted it to feel more cohesive somehow. That was kind of the big push. Like, let's cover more ground, but let's have it feel like this, like, intentional, piece of music where all the songs complement one another. And I felt like we did a better job of that on the second one, and hopefully we do an even better job this time around. So I guess we'll see. one of those people that I get that high, and then I'm like, okay, well, what's next? What's going to give me that charge again as soon as possible? And so for people that don't experience that ever, or seldomly experience that, I wouldn't know how to live that way.
Here's the interesting yin and yang of that too, because one can see that or construe that as being pleasure seeking and fleeting. I disagree. I addictive, like, because I also cards on the table. I'm in recovery from opioid addiction, but I don't see it as in so much as pleasure seeking as I'm trying to dip my toes back into something that's perennial, something that has always existed and will always exist. It's an aspect of art and sex and culture that is very spiritual, and not spiritual as in God or Satan or Jehovah or whatever the fuck you want to call it. It's more to do with the beauty of humanity as the spiritual, art as the spiritual, sex as the spiritual, love as the spiritual, poetry, all of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm so enamored of that and can extol and expound upon the virtues of that for hours, and I make myself sound like I'm up my own ass, and I'm not. It's love. I'm truly in love with all of these things, to the point where I have to make a podcast about it and talk to musicians about it, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is, if you can't think of that record that was like a holy grail, what were the records that outside of Black Flag's Damage that did that for you?
Well, okay, one that immediately pops to mind. So I was recording with my band Swampland. We were doing our full length, and I shared some of the rough, mixes with a friend of mine. And she said, "Oh, are you into 16 horsepower?" And I said, I've never listened to that band before. And she was like, "Oh, well, based on the music you're making, I think that you would really like 16 horsepower. And I said, okay. And so I tracked down Sackcloth and Ashes.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like, I still like, I mean, this must have been like 2015 or so. I mean, there's not more than a few days that go by that I don't listen to either 16 horsepower or Woven Hand. And those became just, I mean, David Eugene Edwards and all of the projects he's been involved in. They were just, I'm at a loss for words, because still it's just like every time I hear it, like I'm getting goosebumps right now, even just thinking about it. It's just so incredibly powerful to me. And it made me think about music differently. It made me, you were talking about this idea of the spiritual. I'm not a religious person at all. But I wanted, after getting into 16 horsepower and Woven Hand, I wanted to think about how my songs could operate on some sort of spiritual level, even if I'm not a believer, and so I wanted to try and have my songs do more and mean more. And so that's something that I've kind of been chasing ever since.
I'm surprised that you didn't name Dragline by the band Paw, because that's who Swamplands actually reminds me the most of. Paw, P-A-W.
I never listened.
You never listened to Paw. If you love 16 horsepower, you're going to listen to Dragline, and you're going to message me 45 minutes later and thank me profusely. They had a few albums. Brilliant. The vocalist / lyricist, another English major, poet, writer, brilliant human being, tortured soul. It was like bluesy, hardcore inflected, dirgy, just gorgeous Southern Gothic music. And like Converge cites them as one of their major influences.
interesting.
Starkweather, like the heaviest, most psychotic band from Pennsylvania of all time, cites them as a major influence. This band,
Okay. Yeah.
your old band reminds me of this band, and the fact that you don't know about them, I have to put an emphasis on this. You need to listen to Paw Dragline and Paw Death to Traitors. These two records will fucking blow your mind, change your life. I actually have an extra copy of Death to Traitors on vinyl. So if you listen to it and you fall in love with it, I will send it to you.
Okay. All right. I will check it.
I promise.
Okay. No, that sounds good to me. Yeah, I mean, there's, we talked about the birthday party being that for me too. I was like coming from punk and playing in bands where the bass player was just basically following what the guitar player was doing. So when I heard the birthday party, I was like, what? You can play different things at the same time that complement each other musically? So that was a big pivot point for me. Trying to think of other bands that Swans,
Swans. Oh.
Another big one for me that also just made me want to approach things differently, especially like those early 90s records where you've got this beautiful balance of just like this haunting beauty and just like pummeling hard, like heavy, like that was kind of, that balance is something that I try to hit a lot when I'm working on stuff. So that would be another one. I know I'm like looking around in here.
Slint Spiderland is another one like that for me too, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's something about Spiderland that marries the sublime and the vulgar so beautifully that it almost feels dirty to listen to it, like watching one of those Mexican death videos in like the early 90s. Like you're looking at people actually dying and you're like, oh, but you can't look away.
Faces of Death.
Yeah, Faces of Death, but more so those Mexican death magazines and videos that were making the rounds in the metal scene back in the late 80s and early 90s. They were just vicious, horrifying to watch, but you're like looking through your fingers still, like you can't unsee it, but you can't stop seeing it. That's how like Slint was for me. That's how when Neurosis first came out with Souls at Zero, that album,
introduction to them,
yeah, they stopped being like a crust band and started being like some like what we know as Neurosis. They started being actually Neurosis. It scared me. Music doesn't often do that. Like shakes me, it creeps me out. It's like walking into a haunted house. I told Steve Von Till this actually when he was on the show, that the first time I heard Souls at Zero, it felt like I was walking into a house that was haunted. And he got it. Because, he's a spiritual guy in his own way too.
Yeah.
Like it felt like something was watching me when I was listening to it. He loved that.
Okay, I thought of two more.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Scott Walker earlier. That was, like I said, I became completely obsessed with him. The old croony stuff and the insane old man Scott Walker stuff. I of course, like the singing, like if I could sing like young Scott Walker, I don't know what I would do. Like that's my ultimate goal that I know I will never reach. But I like some of the later music stuff, like kind of these blocks of sound, as he called them, I find very inspiring too. And I think some of that stuff is the most terrifying music ever made. I don't know if you listen to any of those later Scott Walker records, but they're
I never stopped listening to Scott Walker.
Yeah. That one and Dead Moon was also a big pivot point band for me. There's just so much about what they stood for and what they did musically that I appreciate so much.
See, and that's where I make the concession that that's what that's what is gothic about music. That is what is Stygian dark. It's not putting on white makeup and playing disco beats and moaning over them. It's more to it's and that's what a lot of them do. And listen, one of my all-time favorite bands is Lycia, and they get mislabeled as goth all the time.
Yeah.
But like these, like I don't want to call out names because there's so much good in that scene, but there's so much bad too. That's basically what they're doing. It's like it's a disco beat, riding a hi-hat. Like just
there's an oversaturation of that. I talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
And like I said, a lot of this stuff sounds more like pop music or club music to me. It doesn't really have what I would call like a gothic feel. And I mean, that's fine. There's just a lot of that stuff that I don't particularly take an interest in.
My assertion was, if you're gonna have the balls to call yourself gothic, give me the creeps, motherfucker.
Yeah, give me the goods.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Creepy goods.
Be as creepy as you're trying to be.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like that way too when I was playing in hardcore punk bands. I was like, these bands are singing about pizza and skateboarding and they sound all pissed off. That's not authentic. Like, I'm gonna be mad about everything I sing about and write about because that's the only thing that like feels right to me. And so and then also too, I was like, I want to sing like more aggressive and I want this to be harder because these, it's like I said, I'm always reacting to things that I'm seeing happening, and that's a big part of what pushes me into the weird, stuff that I think is cool or want to pursue.
Well, that's why, like, right after the youth crew movement, the big movement that really grabbed me was Power Violence when Infest came out and founded it, because some of it could be cartoony in its violence and its anger, but to me it seemed like it was like bands like Man is the Bastard were taking hardcore to extremes that it should have been taken to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I had like Charles Bronson's another great example. Like or Drop Dead. These are bands that that's what hardcore's supposed to be. It's supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to be almost unlistenable to a point because it's so pissed off. Los Crudos is a fucking phenomenal example of that. They need to be pissed about the right things. And I felt the same way you did. That's why I started playing in grindcore bands at a certain point because hardcore wasn't hard enough. It wasn't austere and real enough. And that gets old. And then at some point or another, I'm like, I'm just going to listen to the Jayhawks and leave it all alone. I think right around the time when Chamberlain stopped being like an emo band and started being an Americana band, like I started to think the album No Depression is probably better than 90% of the stuff coming out on Revelation Records anyway. So I'm going to kind of go this route and listen to Whiskey Town a lot. and I think a lot of us went through that phase and started wearing more denim. But, you find the real in everything if you are willing to dig in independent music. I think you can always distill the bands that are truly important within the context of scenes and stuff like that. Like when the emo thing was big for me, was Texas Is the Reason was around and Mineral and Sunny Day Real Estate. Like the cream always rose to the top, and all the other offshoots you just kind of tolerated and they went away. I think there was a distinct movement in the early 2000s where all of that was out the window and we were just kind of fucked in hardcore and punk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because with the exception of a couple bands like American Nightmare, everybody else was just kind of throwaway. And that would have been when you were late teens, early 20s, right?
Around what year?
Or the early 2000s.
I graduated high school in 2005, so I was 18 in 2005.
Right. So
When I started like my first real band, and that all came about because we were going to see these old, 80s hardcore bands and old punk bands come through town, and the bands that would open for them were these like middle-aged bar punk bands that were super cheesy, and
yeah.
we're like, we want to like our whole idea of starting the band was, oh, let's play it in a band that's like a band we would want to see open for these bands.
Yeah.
And so, we were involved in this scene where it was very like 80s hardcore worship. Like,
Of course.
my band, all these other bands that sprouted up around that time, there was this whole like between like 2005, 2010, all of these, bands emulating that, 80s hardcore sound. So that's where I learned all the, tricks of the DIY trade, and
Yep.
learned how to tour and put out records and do all that stuff. So,
So you probably owned a copy of Book Your Own Life and all that.
yeah.
Yeah. That's fucking brilliant. When my original bands would be touring, I had a dialer. Did you ever hear the stories about dialers?
No.
What it was a dialer was like it had a phone, like number pad on the back of it, and on the front had a speaker. You were supposed to hold it up to a payphone and type your code in so you could listen to your voicemail when you're away from home. This was well before cell phones were really a big thing.
Yeah.
So you could go to, if you were industrious enough, which I was, you could go to Radio Shack and buy a certain crystal that you could solder into the breadboard on it, and it fools the phone company into thinking you're dropping nickels into a payphone.
Oh wow! So you were just getting free phone calls then?
Free phone calls. We would book everything, make long distance calls. Like I would call Discord House, like just crazy shit, and set up tours and kind of like make our own little internal commerce happen off of stealing from the phone company. And then we kind of got into stealing phone cards from major label bands, which that was another thing. But before that, we had the dialers, and it was like a little network within hardcore. Like only hardcore kids knew about this shit. It was fun. It was a fun aspect of that scene back in those days.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I remember the early tours that I was a part of. We had the printed out MapQuest directions. Like there weren't GPS devices readily available at that point. So, if we got lost or something, we would have to call somebody or try to make sense of these, printed maps or whatever we had with us.
Yeah, we used to use the road atlases in my my salad days, no pun intended. But if we could kind of like circle back a little bit just for a second, when it all shook out with the woman in question from the first record, how was it that, like, how did you decide that you were going to stay in Portland?
Well, at that point, I had difficulties with the relationship, but I was completely in love with Portland. I had wanted to move here for several years. And so when that was all kind of falling apart, there was no question in my mind. I knew I was going to stay in Portland, but then I was, I was like, but I don't want to give up having a practice space in my house. It was an incredible thing to experience living in Portland because I never had that in California.
Yeah.
And so I started kind of looking around at, potential options, because I needed to move out. And I had actually my bandmate and his partner had just bought a house. And I was like, well, hey, like if they pulled it off, maybe I could pull it off. And so I started kind of doing some digging, doing my research, and I was like, yeah, I could do it. And so I went to the lady in question and I was like, hey, I am starting to look around, but just so you know, I've decided to buy a house. So it takes a month to close, and so you'll just have to like be cool with me staying here a little longer, because at that point I felt entitled
Yeah.
to say that that's what was happening, because I had been just, I mean, I won't get into any of the gory details, but I had been put through the ringer, you know, day in and day out for I don't even know how long. But so I was just like, yeah, sorry, like that's what's happening now. And so I ended up, actually, funny enough, I bought a house like around the corner from that house, but it was far enough away for me to feel like I was safe now. And then had to, build out a new space there. And then, just started writing the second record there. And then now I'm in a different house than that house, and I built a practice space out here. And and we're just plugging away at the next one. Everything okay?
Oh yeah, everything's perfect. He's dead asleep. That's where we want him. So I guess to kind of like wind things down, you made it past all of that. Now we're into the writing process of record number 3. How close are you to that milestone, like finishing it?
Well, I mean, we still got a ways to go. Songwriting has gotten very intense for us. I mean, the first song we finished for this new record we'll be doing, I think we did like 4 or 5 different versions of this song before we were happy with it. And now we think it's like the new benchmark for us as far as songs are concerned. But, I think, kind of building off of what we did on the second record, where, we tried to make the arrangements, interesting and kind of keep you on your toes. Still considering that, but like I said before, using the idea of, okay, what did we do that we liked, and just like we want to push things to like further extremes. Want to play around with aspects that we're not super, I won't say skilled at, but that we haven't really explored that much, like doing things with like passages that are more like minimalist, things like that. So we've been playing around with a bunch of stuff. We have multiple songs that are like in the works, where musically they're maybe like 3/4 of the way done. We have a couple songs that are done completely, and then a few more that are just kind of starting to be formed, but the goal is to hopefully have enough for another full length and record again before the end of the year. So
will we see a physical version of Sway?
Yeah, that'll be out. So we're touring in March. We're doing a West Coast tour, and I was told by the plant that if there are no unforeseen delays, that we should have them in time for our tour. So I'm thinking we'll more than likely have the records by March.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I need one.
Well, I'll snatch one for you. You just gotta let me know too, because there are going to be 3 different color variants.
Oh, nice.
You have to tell me. I have a feeling you're going to want the hand poured gold and dark red.
Sounds like it's up my alley. Yeah. The weirder and more like rare, the better for me, obviously. But the first record only came out on black, right?
Yeah.
So that's cool. At least you're getting 3 variants this time around, and you're doing it all yourselves, right?
Yeah. The first one we split with the label, but honestly, I haven't really seen anything happen on that end of things, so I'll probably end up buying those copies back at some point from the label. And then this new one where it's just us, the band, doing it, and hopefully we have a few friends who want to connect us with some labels who might be interested in album 3, so once the songs are, in fine form, we'll send over some practice recordings and gauge interest that way. So
Yeah, I can't imagine it not gleaning some sort of interest. I mean, it's the right time. Right now, to me, it seems like not only does dark music have a new renaissance on the horizon, but music that kind of skirts genre is especially in favor currently, because I think the people even younger than yourself, like my daughter who's 21, like that age into underground music, genre isn't really a worry anymore. They're not like they're not like married to or codified. Like, I'm a hardcore kid. I'm this. I'm a goth. I'm that. It's just more about, this is really good. I'm going to champion this, and that's refreshing. I think this younger generation of kids coming up are possibly the coolest I've ever seen, because not only are they like that with music, but they're like that with, gender identity and culture. Like, they're so much fucking cooler than we were,
Yeah, I mean, that's always been my major gripe, is how cliquey music scenes, and just, I mean, being a teenager, in itself is, you get pushed or assigned to cliques, or you don't fit in here, and there's this group and there's that group, and I never really understood all of that. I like to bounce around and engage with different types of people. And although I clung to punk as an identity when I was young, because it helped me develop my sense of self, I also at one point just very much pushed back against that. I'm like, the punkest thing I can do is whatever the fuck I want.
Yeah.
And so I feel like now, like you were saying, the kids, there aren't concerns with, oh, I belong to this group, and I do find that very refreshing. And also, as someone who makes music that doesn't really fit neatly anywhere, I hope the youngins take to it.
Oh, I'm quite sure they will. So I think, and to like put a fine point on all this and kind of wrap it up, if you were to kind of like tell that 20-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, what your band was about, what your music is about, what the unifying theme is, what would you tell that person?
I would tell them that Casey Logan is in my house.
Hi, Casey.
And Casey Logan's dog.
Hi again, Casey.
So the question was, how would I describe our music to a 19 or 20-year-old kid?
Yeah, this young kid who's like thirsty for something real, like, and they don't care about what it's codified as, what name it's given. Well, how would you approach that? How would you sell that to them?
That's interesting, because I'm sure you've probably experienced this too, when people, come up to you and they go, yo, you're in a band. What does your band sound like? Yeah. It's just such a strange thing to answer, because you don't know what that person's point of reference is, what they're into, what they know about. Like, I could say to one person, like, oh, we're inspired by the birthday party, and they would go, oh, well, cool. And then another person, I could say, oh, we're inspired by post-punk, and they go, I don't know what post-punk is.
Yeah.
So it's like, I usually, my go-to move is like, oh, here's a link, you just listen to it and you tell me what it sounds like. But I think I would maybe, thinking with this generation in mind, try to speak to that there is a lot of attention paid to the lyrical content, that it is dealing with some of these, heavier issues, and kind of hitting these, personal demons head on, but through a more poetic lens. And also just kind of speaking to the overall tone and mood of the music. I throw around words like, oh, we're a heavy, twangy post-punk band or whatever, but I think if I was having a heart-to-heart conversation with a young person, that I would just try to kind of discuss the mood. You know, I want it to be cathartic. I would want to explain that I want it to be something that they can connect with and feel a sense of catharsis. And maybe if they're dealing with similar emotions, that they feel like they're not alone in those emotions. For me, when people are like, oh, you listen to like sad or aggressive music so much, like, you know, why? And it's like, because like there's a shared connection there where I go, oh, like this is not just a me problem. Like there are so many people who have experienced this. And I just want to, you know, I would just talk about how I want the music to make them feel something and to think about things. There's music that's great to just put on and dance around the house to, but that's not what I want this to be. Like I want, you know, a young person or otherwise to engage with it emotionally and intellectually and hopefully be able to pull something from it.
Yeah, you basically tell them I want you to not ignore.
Well, it's like, you know this idea of intentional listening.
Yeah, exactly. Like mindful listening. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I want people to take out the lyric sheet out of the record. I want them to, you know, read the lyrics as they're listening to the music and connect all those dots. And then, yeah, like I said, hopefully feel something afterwards.
So I guess in closing, I've kind of broached everything, but what's your plans for tour? Are you planning on touring on this upcoming record? Or are you planning on touring before it?
Well, yeah, so we're supposed to have Sway right before this tour, and since we didn't tour on the Longer Road, we haven't toured on this one, it'll just kind of be us out on the road with both records in hand. Yeah. And then, like I said, hopefully record the next one later this year, and then next year hopefully have it in hand and do you know, maybe some Midwest and East Coast dates and hopefully tour on that record. But with, you know, how delayed everything has been in the vinyl manufacturing world, I don't know if we'll have the third one in hand that quickly, but definitely have the intention of doing more touring in 2024. And, you know, hopefully, you know, maybe coming through and hanging with you.
We'll give you a place to crash. My wife and I are buying a farm in the near future, so we'll have plenty of room for you.
That'd be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, the cruelty-free farm. All right, my friend. Listen, you go give Casey a hug for me because he's a beautiful human, and I hope to talk to you again soon because you're as nuanced as I am, and that's refreshing.
Yeah, I'd love to chat again. I mean, recorded for the podcast or otherwise. If you just want to nerd out on some records, I'm sure my girlfriend would appreciate me kind of offsetting some of that and directing it your way. So anytime.
All right, my friend. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye now.
Folks, that was my conversation with Davey from Dry Wedding. New album, Sway. The vinyl, the physical component, is finally available on Bandcamp. We dug really deep in this one, which we often do on this program. I'm happy to share this with you. This weekend is going to be a 3-episode drop. 3 episodes. Well, 2 this weekend and 1 right after the weekend. It's a lot of work. I'm really killing myself trying to get good content out to you fine people. I hope you appreciate what I'm doing to myself for you. Listen, I love doing this stuff. This is my heart. I want you to turn this podcast off as soon as
you hear the end of this dry wedding song, and get ready for tomorrow's episode. He's been Davey. I've been Peter. You've been beautiful. And this has been the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Take care, everybody.
Decisions will be your recognition. A spirit works for the fingers to land. I gave in to getting it all. It was too much for you to say. To keep